We're starting a new series through the Gospel of Luke called The Table. And it's a look at Jesus' work specifically through the meals that Jesus shared with people throughout Luke's Gospel. And what's really fascinating when you read Luke's Gospel is that the whole flow of the book, it all follows a series of meals. Jesus is regularly found eating with his disciples, with Pharisees. He's at banquets, or he's even in these intimate suppers, but there is always a shared meal. In fact, 1 out of every 5 sentences in Luke's gospel has Jesus involved in a meal of some kind. That means 20% of Jesus' ministry in the gospel, he's eating. He is always heading to a meal, sharing a meal, or leaving a meal. The table is central to our understanding of Jesus and his ministry. Even when you read what Jesus says in Luke chapter 7, verse 34, it says that Jesus said, the Son of Man has come what? Eating and drinking. And what did even people say about him? Look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Notice Jesus didn't say, I came teaching and preaching. Jesus didn't say, I came healing and performing miracles. Jesus said, I came eating and drinking. So much so that Jesus had a bad reputation for it. And I think this is the first time I realized that in my head, I've always pictured Jesus as a skinny person. I'm not so sure. Especially because he seems obsessed with bread, you know. But if you wanted to find Jesus, all you needed to go was to do is go to the local tavern, the bars, the parties, or the restaurants, because that's where Jesus seemed to spend his time, over meals. But Luke's entire narrative revolves around these various meals that Jesus shares. And to make the point even stronger, when you get to the end of Luke's gospel, Luke 24, at the very end of it, Jesus has been crucified, he's been buried, he's been raised from the dead, and a couple of his disciples are walking on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus shows up and he walks with them. And he does it for miles, and they don't recognize him. They don't know who he is until it says they share a meal. In Luke 24, 30, and 31, it says that when Jesus was where? At the table with them. He took the bread and blessed and broke it and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And he vanished from their sight. So when did they finally recognize Jesus? At the table. That's when they remembered him. That's when something so familiar happened that it was undeniable now who they were with. He had spent his entire ministry for the last 3 years at tables. Even non-Christian Bible scholars acknowledge that Jesus spent a lot of time sharing meals with people. And before we get into the first meal Jesus shares, I want to explain why the table plays such a pivotal role, not just in his ministry, but in the life of the people he was around. In almost every culture, the table is symbolic of relationship. To enjoy a meal together is a sign of friendship or fellowship. I mean, think about it. Have you ever called someone around 6 and realized what time it was and said, "Am I interrupting dinner?" Have you ever done that? Or when you gather for holidays, what is always the big event that marks every holiday? What are you eating, right? How many of you after a holiday meal are stuffed to the gills, right? Like you just can't move, you're in a food coma, you're ready to go to bed. We mark every great occasion with food. If you ask someone out on a first date, you know what it almost always involves? Dinner. Because, hey, I don't know what to say. I'm just going to shove food in my mouth, and I hope that something happens here. And so even if you're kind of a putz, maybe the meal's good, and they think they like you because they like the food, right? But if you don't mean to have a relationship with someone, it's an awkward thing to share a meal with them. I mean, think about trying to find a place to eat the first time you went to the school cafeteria. You don't just sit down at someone's table, right? Like if someone doesn't invite you to the table, it can be a little bit of an awkward interaction. And one of the worst things to feel is not only do you have nowhere to go, but then you go off and you sit at that table by yourself, right? But think about it. If you were out to eat, like if Tamara and I were out to eat, and someone just randomly pulled up a chair and sat at our table and ordered food and started eating with us, we would probably both sit there just looking at the person, saying, hi, how are you, right? Because to share a table, there's intimacy there. There's intimacy there. And so to invite someone to the table is an invitation to relationship. And so when Luke constantly sets the scene of Jesus' ministry, the picture we're meant to get is that Jesus is inviting all kinds of people into relationship with himself. Jesus, through Luke, will be found eating with sinners and tax collectors and Pharisees and scribes, his own family members and even disciples. And he invites them all to dine with him. And so as we look at the meals that Jesus ate with people over the next few weeks, the goal for us is that we would be able to find ourselves in one of these stories. And some of these stories, to be honest, are going to confront us. And then there's other stories in here that are going to comfort us. But my hope is that in all of these meals, we would, as a people, develop a way of life that also centers around the table. That we would eat with Jesus, and we would eat with the people that he ate with. Not just to relate with Jesus, but also so that we would relate to the others who are around us. And so we're going to look at the first meal right now that Jesus has in the book of Luke. In Luke chapter 5, 32, it says, after this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at a tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. And Levi made him a great feast in his house. And there was a large company of tax collectors and others. And I like that, and others. Who are they? Others. Reclining at the table with them. And the Pharisees and their scribes grumbled at Jesus' disciples, saying, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" And Jesus answered them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." Okay, so in this story, we find Jesus eating in the home of Levi, who is a tax collector. And just because I think we just know tax collectors are supposed to be bad people, we don't feel what that means for them to be bad people. Because, I mean, yeah, how many of you like paying taxes? Any of you are like, yeah, I could take them or leave them, right? That's not what this is. A tax collector, if you were a tax collector back then, you were an Israelite who was hired by Rome to collect money from other Israelites, and that money would go to fund the Roman occupation of your country. And so imagine if you were an Ukrainian fundraising to help Russia take over the country. If you are a tax collector, you are hated by everyone you know, everyone you grew up with. You are a traitor. Your family likely has nothing to do with you. And not only that, but because there was this bad relationship, they had no problem charging their fellow countrymen in order to make healthy. So if the tax bill was $200, wouldn't you know when they knocked on the door it was actually $300? And if you're not going to pay, well, there's a Roman soldier right down the street. And so you could go to prison, you could pay. But either way, you're going to pay. And Jesus comes up to this tax booth and not only calls this man to be one of his disciples, but Levi throws a party to celebrate Jesus. Except, who are the only people that come to a party thrown by a guy like this? Mayor's not coming to this party, right? You're not having the local school teachers show up at this party. This isn't a prayer group that's coming to this party. This is a party in every sense of the word. This is the party that the police come to say you're being too loud. Okay? This is a party that people are leaving their horses tied to a post and walking home from. That kind of party. The only people who would show up at a party like this are tax collectors and others. Only the worst of society would be caught dead at this party. And outside of this party are the Pharisees, the religious leaders, protesting not only this party, but that Jesus is the guest of honor. But they wouldn't come into the party to talk to Jesus. Did you notice that? They're not saying, Jesus, we have a question for you. Hey, Jesus, could you maybe explain this to us? Who are they going to? His disciples. They're trying to undermine the very people who are following Jesus. And they're asking, why would he be eating and drinking with people like this? But I want you to get why this is the problem they had. It wasn't just that they were tax collectors and sinners in this party. What's equally important to the story is what happened just before it. What did verse 27 say? After this. After what? After what? Right before this party, Jesus had healed a man who was lame. And Jesus had healed this man for a specific reason, to prove that the Son of Man on earth had the power and the authority to forgive sins. To prove that because only God could forgive sins, that Jesus was God in the flesh there among them himself. And so when this man got up, it proved that Jesus was God, and it proved that he had the ability to forgive sins, and it proved that he could make a lame man walk. And it says in verse 26, the one right before this, and amazement seized who? Them all. Not some of the people in the house, everyone who was there. All means, I hate this in the Greek, all means all. Everyone. Even the Pharisees and the scribes who watched this happen were amazed. This is early in Jesus' ministry. They haven't figured out if they're fighting yet. And they glorified God and were filled with awe, saying, we have seen extraordinary things today. All were amazed. The man, the disciples, the crowd, the Pharisees. Everyone glorified God when they saw this miracle. And everyone understood who Jesus was claiming to be. And for a moment, the Pharisees were trying to wrap their mind around who Jesus was. Jesus was able to forgive sins. Jesus could heal and rescue people. Jesus was the Messiah they were waiting for. And so if you're a religious leader, you have been waiting for this day to come, for God to show up as man. You can already imagine the kind of things Jesus would do, the people that Jesus would be with. They had expectations for who Jesus was going to be. And then, so they're ready to go to the synagogue. They're ready to go to the temple. They're ready to have a Bible study with Jesus. Except Jesus doesn't go to the synagogue, and he doesn't go to the temple, and he doesn't go to their Bible study. He doesn't make them rank and file his disciples and give them authority over the people. Instead, Jesus is found with the worst person and with the worst people. Their problem wasn't as simple as who Levi was. Their problem wasn't yet that Jesus could forgive sins. Their problem was that Jesus claimed to be who he said he was, and then he was with sinners. In their mind, God does not work this way. God would forgive people like the religious leaders, but he wouldn't dare to be caught with someone like Levi. God could forgive sins, but he wouldn't forgive people like them. To be with sinners was essentially to say that God treated these tax collectors like equals. and a holy God wouldn't dare be around sinners. God would only forgive the sins of good people. And so when this discussion happens, I love how simple Jesus makes everything. Because, if you watch, hang on, how a little pop culture reference. I heard there's going to be 60 hours of testimony for both Amber Heard and Johnny Depp. That's 120 hours, people. That's I can't do that. I have like this much threshold for nonsense anyways. Jesus does it in a sentence. He doesn't need the time. He cuts right through the garbage and he gets to the point. Jesus says he's gone to these people because these are exactly the kind of people that God needs to forgive. And they are exactly the kind of people that Jesus wants to be with. He says in Luke 5:31-32, he says, those who are well have no need of a physician, but only those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. To be with sinners was not a rejection of God's holiness. It was not a minimization of their sin. Instead, it was a recognition of it. And that in being with people in their sin, that you would find the very heart of God. And if we are people who follow Jesus, then it means that we will find ourselves at the same tables that Jesus found himself at. That the church should be a place where the rich and the poor, the young and the old, the black and the white can all sit around the same table, because that is where Jesus is. That the things that make us different and divide us are put away, because we are made brothers and sisters in Jesus. And that the table that Jesus sits at is the most beautiful picture of what Jesus is about. And it is so much the picture of what Jesus is about that when you get to Revelation and you read about how heaven is described, it is described as a table, as the marriage feast of Christ. Meaning that when a church comes to the table like that, it gives us the closest experience we might have of knowing what heaven is like. That the church at the table can be on earth the way it is in heaven. But I want to admit something to you right now. I have to admit that as often as I would love to think I would be in the house with Jesus, I often find myself on the outside looking in. And what I see as Jesus sits at the table with sinners, and I don't have to put them as tax collectors, I don't even have to put them in a special group. Here's how I'm going to put it. As I see Jesus sit with the people who have sinned against me, that offends me. And I struggle to believe that God would work that way. I struggle to believe that Jesus would sit at the table of the people who have offended me and hurt me and wronged me. Because I am right and they're wrong. I read what Jesus does. I preach what he does. But there are people in my life that I just, in my heart of hearts, don't believe that God invites to his table. And it's because they're to mine. And I know that there are people that I hold deep anger and resentment and bitterness toward. And I know that sometimes I share that resentment with God for being merciful to the people that I think are undeserving. And yet, even when I stand outside of Jesus, critical of what he is doing and the people he is with, it does not stop him from still being inside with those people. And yet, he is still on the inside, inviting me to join him at his table. Because I am also one of the people who is sick, that Jesus is trying to save. This table is as beautiful and as ugly as depending on how you see the people who sit around it. This is a really encouraging thing when we think about the people who are near and dear to our hearts, that they could be welcome here. And this table shatters our hearts for the people that we don't think should. And I think this understanding of the table is meant to challenge us in a couple of ways. And I want to put them in front of you this week. Because I think if we don't start understanding the table this week, we will never come to the table. There's a reason that this is the first table that happens in Luke. But here's the first challenge I want to put in front of you. On average, you are going to eat 21 meals and probably snack between 21 of them. Any of you snack in between your meals? Any of you like pregame before your meals? Come on, okay. But what I want to know is, how many of those meals are you going to share with someone who's different than you? Who are you going to eat with this week? And I realize that could be a hard question. Because I think we would say, we do the thing, well, I would eat with anyone. Well, I would be with anyone. It's fine, they could be here. It's easy to have good intentions. It's a whole other thing than to intentionally do something. Man, if anything has taught me about the difference between good intentions and people who are intentional, it's been this last week. I've heard a lot of thoughts and prayers. I've seen a lot of people drive by with a camera as they film the wreckage of people's lives. I didn't see as many people get knee-deep in the rubble. It's hard to answer the question, who will I eat with this week? But maybe the best indicator of what you will do this week is what you have done. So maybe the question you need to ask yourselves is, how many meals will you eat with someone that you would not have 5 years ago? How can you see that over time you have been becoming more like Jesus and able to eat with the people he eats with? How many sinners and tax collectors are at your table? Or maybe your heart's heart toward a Pharisee. How many Pharisees would you invite to your table? The table was not an exclusion of the Pharisees. The Pharisees excluded themselves. The truth is, we have different kinds of people, different groups of people who make us uncomfortable. We all have someone who makes it hard for us to believe that Jesus cares about them the way he cares about us. And so maybe it's someone who votes different than you. Maybe it's someone who thinks different than you. Maybe it's someone who believes different than you. Maybe it's cultural. Maybe it's a lifestyle. Who is it that you have a hard time believing is invited to Jesus' table? Liberals, conservatives, cowboy fans. I know. So I want to challenge you to go and sit with the people that Jesus is already sitting with. He is already there with those people. It's not a question of if they can sit with Jesus. The question is, will you go sit with the people Jesus sits with? This week, can you be so much more like Jesus that it actually ruins your reputation? What terrible things might people say about you because of the company you keep? But for others of you, there's a different challenge the table presents. Some of you, your problem is thinking Jesus only sits with people like you. And then others of you, you don't think Jesus would ever sit with you. You get why Jesus would go to others, but not you. It's school lunch all over again. You sit at another table because you do not believe you would be welcome at Jesus' table. You do not believe you are deserving. Some of us see ourselves as the outcast, the reject, the sinner. Some of us are here today, and just the idea of being in a church service feels incredibly weird. You feel like you needed to get your life together before you came today. And the incredibly good news of the table is that Jesus welcomes the sinner. He doesn't care who you are. He doesn't care how you've been living or what you've done. His invitation is open to you. It's my hope that it's in your unworthiness. You might realize that the further away you feel you are from Jesus, the closer you are finding that you are already at his table. And I want you to think of the implications of what would happen if you actually understood the gospel of the table. Think about how freely and openly you would live your life if you understood that you are accepted by Jesus Christ. Think about how vulnerable you could be about your own sin, understanding that it is not the righteous that Jesus is calling, but the sinner. Or maybe a better way for us to put this is that this is not a table for those who think that they're righteous, but for people who know that they're not. And so, who do I see myself as in the story? You could put that third point up. How healthy do I actually believe that I am? The tragedy I think we find in a lot of churches is that we are really quick to point out the faults of others, but really slow to recognize our own. I have often wondered what would happen if instead of protesting the lives of sinners, we entered into the lives of sinners. I have wondered what would have happened if we quit making political posts about what we think should happen. We're getting ready to celebrate Mother's Day. And out there we've got the bottles from Embrace. And we help moms. And right now what everyone would rather do is talk about what the Supreme Court is going to do. What I want to know is, what single mom are you in the life of? What child are you in the life of? I'm glad you can have a meme. I'm glad you can have a post. But you are not doing that for the edification of anyone in need. What if we entered into the lives of sinners themselves and ate at their tables? Martin Luther said this. He said, "Beware of aspiring to such purity that you will not wish to be looked upon as a sinner or to be one, for Christ dwells only in sinners." The point of that quote isn't to avoid transformation, but there is no transformation without accepting the reality of who we are and the reality of who Jesus is. And so it is beautiful that we get to come and gather here together on a Sunday, not as an acknowledgement that we have it together, but an admission that we don't. Not because we are the good and the right and the healthy, but we are those who are in need of Christ's love and forgiveness. And that's the one reason it is so important that we practice communion here together as a church body every week, because we all get to come to a table where Jesus is at. And we all get to come together. And if we refuse to come together, what we actually discover is we are in effect refusing to come to Jesus. Instead, we find ourselves outside of the house where Jesus is, not only being critical of who Jesus is with, but becoming critical of who Jesus is. And the church will never be what it was meant to be until someone is at your table who you wish wasn't. The gospel is that God has chosen them as much as He has chosen us. And He has chosen us for each other. We're going to have this time of communion. And if you're not familiar with communion, let me just give you a brief explanation of what it is. Communion is a time where we come to these three tables. We have one in the back and two on the sides. And we come and we have bread that represents the body of Jesus, that God was with us, that God came and sat at our table, and that God died for us. Because the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And so we come to the table and we eat and we drink and we remember. And we all get up and we do it together. Because everyone belongs at the table. That's actually one of our key values here at Epic Church. Everyone is welcome. Everyone. And so we ask that you come, that you pray, and that you come to the table, and you come and you eat and you drink, and you remember Jesus. And you remember the people He was with. If you're new here, we're glad you came. On the bottom of those bulletins is a connect card. We'd love to just connect with you, to talk with you, to get to know you, to be able to spend some time with you, to hear your story. I'll even take you out to eat. See, I have to. It's biblical. I have to. No fish. But we'd love to connect with you. And if you need prayers, on the back of that, there's a place for you to put some prayer requests. You could turn that into. But if you don't know what it's like to be welcome at Jesus' table, I want you to know what it's like to be welcome with Jesus. I want you to know what it is to be loved by Him. And so I'm going to pray, and when Tim plays, we ask you to come to the tables, to come eat and to come drink, and to come and turn in those cards. It's also time for your tithes and offerings. Man, I got to tell you, we have had several $1,000s in financial donations, and also, I don't know how many $1,000s in other like donations come in to bless the families in Andover. It is amazing what has come in. No, this is good. That's good. That's fine. There's a lot of work to do. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But we are not done restoring the lives of those people. We're not done. The amount of people who I talk to and the things that they've gone through. I talked with a man the other day who the thing he was thanking God for was that when the wall of his house blew down, that the thing that was still standing was his son's ashes. And that was the thing he was holding on to. Homes can be rebuilt. We got to get in people's lives. God is near to the broken. And so let's go where He's at. So I'm going to pray. And after I'm done praying, come to the table, come eat, come drink, come put in your cards, come give your tithes and offerings. Come bless the community of Andover. And if you want to give specifically to Andover, you can still text to give to, like it's up there, and just write the word Andover. And all of that money will go there. We won't take a dime. But you have been so faithful. Thank you.